I think an important point that you and I both have experienced is this idea that failure isn't the end. I think a really good example of this is the end of your running career. What was your mindset when that happened? Like, how difficult was that? For a lot of people, they see the end of a career, the end of a hobby, the end of a sport as the end of their personality. And I think that holds a lot of people back.
Yeah, I totally get it as well, because you wrap up a lot of your identity in something that you fully absorb yourself in. And if
All right, Parallel Mike, welcome to The Competent Man. Thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me, Tom. You know, it's an honor to be on your show, whether it's Palisades or the new one, Competent Man. So thank you.
I think I need to start by extending some gratitude towards you for showing me and carting me around Poland. We've been trail running, we've been visiting castles, we've been doing all kinds of stuff, and I really appreciate and am very grateful for you showing me some excellent hospitality in a country that I don't know that I would have ended up in other than for visiting you.
Well, yeah, again, thank you, Tom. You know, I think I speak for everybody that is listening to this, that we all owe a debt of gratitude to you. You've given us so much information over the years. You deliver so many great interviews. Your hosting, I would say personally, I think it's the best out there. You always get the most out of your guests with really thoughtful questions. You put a lot of time into it. And so when you reached out and you spoke about, you know, I'm coming to Europe, maybe I could swing by your country where you're staying. And I was like, well, it's not quite on the same path, but you could definitely do it. I was all about that. I said, yeah, let's do that. And, you know, I wanted to show you a really fun and great time, because that's the best way I thought I could pay you back for all of the wisdom you've given me over the years. And you've given me a lot. So thank you. And I think I say that from all the listeners, that we just really hope your new venture goes fantastically.
Well, again, thank you. You know, it's kind of funny being in this position, and especially with the, let's say, leaving Palisades and starting over in a big way. It's been a really odd feeling to have this outpouring of support, and really with a lot of people like yourself telling me a lot about some of the journeys that I've been with them through their lives. It's kind of an odd thing in some ways, because I don't necessarily think of it like that. I don't necessarily get a chance, or people don't necessarily share that with me all the time. So it is kind of an odd thing, but you know, it's been extremely humbling. But going back to how you and I first met, you reached out and wanted to, in a way, be on Palisades. We've built a friendship over the years. We've never met in person, which is, you know, kind of how I've done some of my trips with Francis in Africa, or, you know, there's been a couple others. But, you know, you're actually a perfect guest for the main focus of how I started this particular channel of The Competent Man, right? You're now an expat, you've been a sailor, you've been a boxer, you've been an ultra runner, you know, a pro athlete, you're now a podcaster, a new father, a homesteader. I mean, there's just this wide range that I can certainly appreciate about you, and the fact that you're able to really spread your way of learning into all of these different areas, I find is excellent. We've had some really interesting conversations over the last week here. We explored a castle today that was, parts of it were thousands of years old. We're sitting here in this beautiful hotel that's a couple hundred years old. This staircase, I think, she said it was 300 years old. So it's been a really cool experience to be in Poland with you. So I'd like to kind of start by maybe asking you what you think has drawn you to all of these different activities, right? Because they're very different and disparate skills and ideas that really don't relate but make you a competent man?
Wow. Well, I don't think I've ever been asked that question, but thank you for asking it. I think a lot of it, Tom, comes, and this is something we've spoken about a lot over the last few days, just as we was hiking hills together, we was running together, and I said to you earlier, I've spent more time with you one-to-one in the last 5 days than I think I've spent with anyone but my wife over the last 15 years. Because normally you see somebody, you maybe go for a meal, you spend a night with them, and then you head off your separate ways, maybe meet again the next day. But we was literally hanging out the entire time. And I think it comes down to something, I can't take any credit for anything that I'm competent at. It's just my personality type, that when I find something that I'm really interested in, I can hyper focus on that, and I want to consume as much as possible on that subject. I want to learn all about it. And I guess I always try and look to people that are above me, and I never do that with this kind of ego or like jealousy or envy. I just see them and say, wow, I wish I could be that good. What would it take to get that good? And sometimes the way that things happen in your life, hobbies that come about you, they kind of fall in your lap. Like boxing, for example. I never planned to be a boxer. I was training. I loved exercise. I didn't exercise at all up until the age of 17. I lived like a dog. Like we've got a nice old pint here, but I drank too many of those and I smoked too many of the cigarettes. And at some point I just got tired of that. And I thought, I really want to get into shape. And I was lucky enough to find a fellow Canadian. His name was Ross Enamate, and he was a boxing trainer. So I bought all of the content I could of him, consumed it all, and started implementing that. And I really just became like a monk once I started training. I was like, I'm just going to do this, get myself in shape. And I really become enthused, which I think is a part of it, is that passion. Like if you can muster up passion for something, it's like, wow, that can take you places. And at some point, I think it was my dad, he said, the boxing gyms doing these like private lunchtime sessions, do you want to come down and punch some bags? And the coach said, oh, you're pretty tall and pretty light. I could do something with that. Got these long gangly arms, and the kids you'll be fighting will be about 5 foot and you're 6 foot, because I'm extremely light and tall. So, he said, do you want to come to the proper sessions? I said, sure, why not? And this is another thing we've discussed, is saying yes to things. Like you're here because you're a yes man. You're somebody, and I don't mean that in the negative connotation. You say yes when there's an opportunity there. You could say no, stay at home, or you could say yes, take some risk. I could have dumped you here. You could have been in the middle of nowhere, living off pierogi, but you said yes.
As I thought I was on the first morning.
Well, we'll come back to that one. And that was how it happened with boxing. It just fell in my lap. I went to the gym. Somebody said, I think you could be good at something. I sucked at it for the first year. I got smashed to pieces. Took me about a year to land my first punch, but I stuck with it. And something about it excited me, and that's how I've always been. And my boxing career came to an end. I won some national titles. I won my league in the university class and things like this, but that was not my future. I had a different future ahead of me. It was the same with running. Like I became an ultra runner by accident. It's just something that I did, really liked it. And as I said before, I just hyper focus when I enjoy something, and I consume as much as I can. I mean, as a runner, I went all in. My first race, I think I came not last, but I was close. I was over ambitious. I was hubristic. I jumped in and thought, oh man, I was a boxer, I can do this. And no, that's not the way life works. Like, every hill's a different route you've got to take. And so, that first race, I got humbled. But yeah, I always have that. I guess I just have this ability to say, if somebody else can do it, why not you? You might not be as good as them, but if you really go all in on something, you can do pretty well. And pretty well's exciting. So that's what I did with running, and it turned out I was probably a better runner than I was a boxer. In fact, as a boxer, I was a runner. You saw a video of me boxing. I was running around that ring, just staying away from these guys with using like long gangly arms. And as a runner, like I genuinely thought that was my future. I went all in on that. Mm-hmm. I sacrificed a lot. I gave up my career, went part-time, was living hand to mouth, you don't get no money for winning those races, but I loved it. I loved being out in nature for hours on end. And just like this huge challenge, to run these long races competitively and against the best of your peers. It's like, wow, like that just excited me. But I got a chronic injury. And that's life. So that door closed. And then after that, this is kind of where you come in, actually. I met my wife. I moved aboard a boat. Convinced her to come aboard the boat, which she was totally against. But one night I got her drunk and said, how about that boat? And about 3 years later, she said, Mike, wasn't it a great idea of mine that we moved aboard that boat? And I was like, yeah, it was. So anyways, we moved aboard the boat, and this was kind of my drive when I met my wife to really focus on actually something that I'd never done, something that I was a complete novice at, which was wealth. Because all the things I'd done in the past were passion projects, things that I loved. But I recognized as we discussed our future and what she wanted to do, and also what I wanted to do, to have a farm, to be more self-reliant, to not have to work in jobs that really were underpaid, even though we was overskilled. We was putting a lot of time and effort in. And so I thought I need to take responsibility. And I guess that's the theme as well, is taking responsibility for oneself. And that's when I really wanted to learn about finance. And that's what I did. All the time that I spent running, which as a professional runner, like you're talking, 40 hours a week, either running, rehab, the mental focus as well. We did a lot of visualizations and things like this. I had a coach who was really big on that. And so when I started to think about finance, I kind of just translated anything that I could from running. I didn't want it to be for nothing, that was over. I thought, where's the gold that I mined there? Take that across to something else and use it again. And I did that with finance, spent a lot of time on that. And that's where you came in, because at some point, you took over Palisades. I was already listening to Palisades. And when you took over, it was a different show. You brought a class to it that, this is my personal opinion, so no offense to anyone else that was involved in Palisades before you, but I thought, this guy just gets the best out of these guests. And I used to listen to you, and I was joking to you the other night, me and my wife, we used to be sat there on our boat, and listeners, don't get no grand illusions of this boat. It was a beautiful boat, but it was small. Yeah. And we lived aboard it, and we'd be sat there on the floor playing board games at night with Tom Bodrovics and these guests just sat there in the corner on this little iPad. And you taught me so much. And, I guess the rest is history. Like I learned enough, and I used that to my advantage. Me and my wife moved abroad and whatnot. But the other night we were sat there, and I said, wow, how strange that this man who I knew through the screen, we became friends later on, is now here. And I guess for me, that's the beauty of life. You never know where those roads are going to take you, but you have to take the first step on that road. And you're here, you chose to come here, right? Accepted the invitation too. And I've had a great time, Tom, so thank you.
Well, it's kind of funny because at dinner tonight, you kind of reiterated that, and you said, it's really actually super weird that you're here, because my wife and I have been listening to you for so long, and now you're actually here, kind of thing. So it's again, it's just kind of a funny way that things have of happening. But going back to what you said about mining the gold out of what you learned from ultra running or your boxing career and taking that forward, what were some of those lessons? You mentioned that going all in on something is how you do anything. Right? And that's something that you and I really share. I told you this evening, when I started podcasting, the only way I have of doing anything is to do it 110%. And I can't help almost but doing it. So is that something that passion, that drive to that unmistakable appetite for whatever you put your mind to, or that your mind is put to, is that something that drives you into these new arenas?
It is, but it came from a great failure in my life, which was my boxing career. Because when I was a boxer, I did have natural talent, and I should have gone much further, but I didn't. And the reason I didn't is because I didn't have the mindset for it. I was stubborn. The coach is not good enough. I moved gyms and I moved to another gym, and I was always kind of self-sabotaging in that. And by the time I got to the end of that, there was years that had gone by where I did a fraction of what I could have achieved. And then my career came along, because I was studying as well, and I started very late. I started boxing when I was 19. Most kids have boxed for a decade already at that point. So although I was okay as a boxer, I wasn't fantastic, but I could have probably gone much further is the point. And so I came to get away from that with a bit of regret. And so when I started running, I used the failure. I used the failure too. I mined from that failure, why? What was wrong with you? What do you need to change? And so the first thing I did when I was a runner was take on a coach who not only was, a British champion, so it was somebody who had the credibility and the skills, but he was also somebody who was an expert in sports psychology. And that's really what I needed, was somebody to help me with the mindset of a champion. How do you develop that mindset so that when things get tough, when things are hard, that you find that extra gear when other people can't? And I really thought I had that in me, but he gave me the skill set and the toolbox for that. So that's what I did. And I guess it came down to as well just developing that process of reflection. So when you succeed or when you fail, really the outcome doesn't matter. My best ever race wasn't a race that I won. It was actually a race that I almost, that on paper, I guess, would have been a failure. But my coach always said something to me that stuck with me. He said, your best ever race, the outcome isn't what's going to determine that. It's going to be when you get the very best out of yourself. And you'll come away one day and say, it was that day that I couldn't have got any more out of myself. And to achieve that, he said, you have to always put yourself in the position to get that, which means going all in. And that's easy for me to do because, I'm a bit of an obsessive. If I like something, I do that. And I think this also came from my career in that I worked with a lot of people who, on paper at least, you would say maybe were in, a dire straits. So I worked with a lot of young people from difficult backgrounds or people that had all kinds of traumas. And, without dwelling on that point too much, I became very good at helping them highlight the strengths they could draw from those situations, and myself too. And I think that's something that in society often we miss. We don't get taught those things, that actually some of your biggest strengths will come from your biggest obstacles, barriers, failures, crises. But you have to learn how to, like we said a moment ago, mine that gold. You have to be able to reflect in a way that's productive. Because there's no point in you failing at something and you whipping yourself about it for years on end. That's not productive. And there's nothing wrong with taking responsibility too. I would advocate for that if you do something wrong, or say, okay, I messed up there, but where could I have improved? And then going on and actually doing that. And for me, that's never been that difficult because I just really value that in myself, like personal improvement. I think it's, life's not really, life's not meant to be perfect, right? We're meant to have obstacles. We're meant to have barriers. There's crises, there's unexpected events that will come. But our role as humans is to take what we're given. And we're both a fan of Stoic philosophy. And Marcus Aurelius probably said it best in his simple quote that, the obstacle is the way. You take what's given to you and you say, what can I make of this? What's the best I can do with this obstacle? And there's no better way to do that than become an ultra runner. It's just a long grind for days on, some people, we spoke about it before, some people run for days on end now, like 250 miles, 300 miles. I never did anything like that, but, I was running for 10 hours straight. I run one race that was across a bridge back and forth in winter for 6 hours. It was from 6 p.m. till midnight, and it was just, who's stupid enough to run the most of them back and forth on that bridge? I don't know if that answers the question, but it's it goes back to that mindset, in my opinion, that if you can learn to just be a little bit less emotional about your past situations and look on it more objectively, and have a process which sometimes you need to learn from somebody else. I learned it from a coach, but once that process is there, you can apply that to anything. Because what I learned as a runner, I applied to all aspects of my life. It's totally interchangeable.
Well, that's something that I wrote about on my Substack this past week, is the idea that if life teaches you a lesson, don't shy away from actually trying to absorb and, let's say, internalize that lesson going forward. Even in the past year, I can think of some really hard-earned lessons that if I wouldn't have been open to learning, I don't think I would have ever gotten the value out of that situation. I could have looked at it as just a negative experience that sucked and I just want to put it in my past. And instead, I was very deliberate about trying to learn from that. And it sounds like, there's a lot of situations in your life that have maybe instructed you going forward. One thing I forgot to mention in your resume, in your CV here, is that you were a social worker. And that, to me, obviously I have no experience with something like that. Do you think that gave you a different outlook on life when you see these kids, when you're working with these kids, that, it's not like you and I had perfect childhoods, but we have not a whole lot to complain about, but you worked with these kids for years on end, spent a lot of time with these kids. Did that give you a different perspective and maybe some more gratitude in your life?
Yeah, absolutely it did. And, when you do a career like that, it really does shape you. It molds you as a person over all those years of working with people. Definitely gives you gratitude for what you've got, because I think in the culture we've got today, and we all can fall victim of this, regardless of the generation, but it's that idea that, you're so hard done to, that you need a therapist, that someone needs to look after you. And it's like, well, the kids that I worked with really did need that. But yeah, I found in some of those young people that I worked with this, just unbelievable reservoir of strength. Like, how does that young person show this strength despite what I'm reading about what's happened to them? And I guess, yeah, for me personally, I took that as I've got nothing to complain about, and you want to show up every day for those kids. Like, it was never difficult to get up in the morning to go to work. That's why I chose that career. I wanted a career where I could be motivated every single day. And even on the days when I wasn't motivated, I'd still have this feeling of responsibility that what I'm doing is meaningful enough that I will, turn up and show up. So that was one thing that I took from that. And, I got paid for it, so I'm not pretending I'm a martyr. It was a career like anybody. We all have to earn our money somewhere, and there's no, I don't judge anyone regardless of what they do. We all take a path in life. It was just so happened that was the path that I took. And again, I kind of fall into that. It wasn't like I was so specific on that. My degree was in theology, which is completely irrelevant to that career, but I met a person, and like you have demonstrated, and I know this from speaking to you at length, not just on your visit, but in the past, that a fork in the road is there. You can take left or right, and one of them is the safe route and one of them is a little bit risky, and you take that route and something new happens and then a new fork appears. And that's how I've always been, and that's how I ended up in that career. It was totally at random. And I ended up in that career for over a decade, and I guess, yeah, that's the lesson that we've both learned, is that some of the best things that happen in life for you are things that you had no path laid out for. You didn't plan for it. You didn't know you was going to end up there, but you just said yes, and there you go. And that's where it takes you. And the next thing you know, you've had a full career in something that you had no plan to do. So yeah, that's what my career was like. I loved it. It was great. There was a time for it to end, and when it did, I moved to another country and started something completely different. I became, an organic farmer on a small holding, and again, I went into that with absolutely no skills whatsoever. And Roger Bannister, who run the 4-minute mile, he's somebody who I've always looked up to, because at the time he ran that 4-minute mile, he people today say, oh, 4-minute mile, people can run that, it's been broken. But it's at that time, nobody had done that, it was such an amazing feat. But nobody knew it could be done. They used to, even scientists used to say, if you run the 4-minute mile, your heart might blow up. You might die there on the track.
I remember some people pointed to it as being physiologically impossible to run a 4-minute mile.
Which shows you how mindset is that, until somebody does something, like we view it as impossible. It's like we hedge our bets, it's impossible. But Roger Bannister said, nobody had done it. But to do something that seems impossible when people are telling you it's impossible, you have to have the ego and the attitude to believe you can do it, but then the humbleness to go and do it. And I think that was very powerful because that's the way it is. You have to believe in yourself, and that requires you to see something that other people don't see. When I became a runner, I basically come almost last in a race. And I told my family, I'm quitting my career. I'm going to go part-time to become a professional runner. And they was like, you have no evidence to say that's possible. Like, you know what I mean? It's such a stupid thing to do. Like, are you crazy? You're throwing away a career. But I mustered in me that self-belief. And I said, if I said I'm going to do it, I'm going to have to go all in and try and do it. And I did do it. The year after I went back to that first race that I run and almost came last in, and run the longer version, which is where the professional runners were running, and I came second, and I would have won that race, but I got lost because I suck at navigation, as you know, because I took you in the mountains and we got lost multiple times. So you got a really good flavor of my navigation skills. But in any case, and I believe that we have to believe in ourselves, and this idea that we should hide ourselves away and never say what we're good at or praise ourselves. It's like, no, we should look for our strengths, acknowledge our weaknesses, but then always be humble, because if you take that and you put it together just right, you can achieve good things in life. And I personally believe that we need people who are aspirational in this world. There's so many people who have a lot of gifts, a lot of talents, and they hide them away. And then on the flip side, you've got people who are absolutely useless, and they get all the praise and credit, because we live in kind of a fallen age where the things that are lauded up are the superficial. So I always appreciate it when I see somebody that's doing well, and it doesn't have to be somebody that's an athlete, although as a sportsman myself, I love that, and that's why we connected originally. But I could see someone being a great barmaid or a great cleaner. It doesn't matter to me. If somebody's really trying and doing a good job, I think that's commendable. And whatever it is I'm doing, I try to take that with me. Don't always succeed, but I think that philosophy and that attitude can be so powerful if you just foster it. Doesn't matter where you're starting from. Take that attitude, really ferment it, and then see where it takes you in 10 years, because we all want the short-termism in this world, but that's not the way it is. Just build upon yourself. And I don't want to sound like a self-help guru here, Tom, so I'm going to hand it back to you. But that's just, to me, that kind of incremental progression is very powerful, whether it's in investing, it's in your personal life, your relationships, it's in sports. Rome wasn't built in a day. Build a solid foundation and take it step by step. Don't try and cheat the process, because the process itself is what will make you great. Don't try and skip it, because those obstacles you're going to meet along the way are what will teach you what you need to know to get to the next step. And if you skip it, when the hardships and the adversity comes, that's when you fall off a cliff. But if you've done it incrementally, you don't fall off a cliff, you absorb it.
It's all those extra skills you learn along the way that are actually the important part.
Yeah, and you've taught me that too. It's just a shared philosophy. You've been through a lot of hardship, you race. When you took over Palisades, wow, you took over a full show, now you have to prove yourself.
I was just a dumb welder at the time.
You was a dumb welder. And what happened at the end of Palisades? You mentioned before about those messages you got, and you saw this outpouring of support. Wherever you go, we want to follow you. Now, I'm sure that was pretty powerful for you as somebody that, wasn't a Wall Street guy. You didn't live in that world.
It was also very, very, very humbling. But you mentioned this idea about not being a self-help guru kind of thing. And my goal with Competent Man is to help broaden people's horizons, in some ways give people some hope, give people some motivation to grind through something, and maybe inspire people to try something they haven't before. And I think an important point that you and I both have experienced is this idea that failure isn't the end, right? I think a really good example of this is the end of your running career. You kind of mentioned it earlier about getting an injury and just one of your biggest passions in life coming to an end. And in a lot of ways that was like kind of taken away from you. So what was your mindset when that happened? Like, how difficult was that, and how did you move through that period in time? And maybe what was a lesson that you took from that? Because for a lot of people, they see the end of a career, the end of a hobby, the end of a sport as the end of their personality. And I think that holds a lot of people back.
Yeah, I totally get it as well, because you wrap up a lot of your identity in something that you fully absorb yourself in. And if you're like me and you go all in on something, and I did, because that is the only way I know to succeed. Mm-hmm. You know, I don't mind going all in on something, giving it 100%, literally dedicating my life to it and failing, because I can then say to myself, well, I tried my very best and I failed, and it wasn't for me. And I can be like, so be it. But what I can stand, and this goes back to my failure as a boxer, is not doing that, like messing up, screwing up, wasting time. You know, I remember one weekend as a boxer, I was at university, I had a fight, I got hammered the night after the fight. I didn't train at all the week before. I got hammered midweek, and then I went to the next fight the week after because it was a tournament, and I fought the tournament. You know, that is not professionalism, right? And I had to learn as I got older that if you really want to succeed, you have to sacrifice, you have to be disciplined. And so as a runner, I did that, and then it still failed. You know, it still went wrong, and that was really tough, because I'd wrapped so much of my identity up in this. My future was that. Like, I literally had created a future like 15 years out and, you know, out forwards. Like, I'm going to be doing this here, I'm going to be doing that then. I gave my subconscious mind a very clear template as, this is what you've got to achieve. I'm going to do everything I need to do. You get me there. You know, I was visualizations, everything, writing it all down, everything that my sports psychologist told me to do, I did. And I put the training in, which of course, you know, but you can put a lot of work in, but if you don't have it up here, the work's not going to get you there. You have to have both. And some people have great natural talent, so they get away with a lot of things that people like myself couldn't. I had no natural talent as a runner, besides being very, you know, determined, and I could suffer a lot in training. As you found out, because we had a great suffer session the other day training, and I think that's what, you know, I saw in you that day, oh, here's Tom the athlete. Like someone that's willing to really go hard.
As I was bleeding all over myself.
Yeah. And so as a runner, you know, that was really hard. I remember my last race, you know, I got an injury early in my career, and literally it just kind of scarred my career from there. I didn't run for like 6 months when this injury first came. I screwed it up because I kept running on it. I didn't, rest it. I didn't heal it. So I made a mistake, and I didn't listen to my body. And usually that's when things go off the rails in life. When we make a mistake and we reinforce that mistake, we compound it again and again, which I did. And I didn't run, you know, for 6 months at all. Literally, I could barely walk. You know, I was walking with a limp. And this is from somebody who just come second in a 100K race. And, you know, people were saying, this guy's going to be the next so-and-so. You know, wow, he's done so much. And it was like a fall, you know, like Icarus, you go too close and you just crash land. So I thought, okay, I've messed up. I'm going to have to try and fix this. And I did. And I spent 2 years trying to get back. The first year was just a write-off, didn't run. Was on the cycle, literally cycling for 3 hours in a tiny little room on an indoor bike, sweating. And then I bought a treadmill, so I'd literally cycle for 30 minutes. I would run for 2 minutes on a treadmill and then get back on the bike because I couldn't handle more than 2 minutes. And I extended that, and that's what I did for a year. So it was such a slow process. I had so many different therapists. In the end, it was like, you know, shaman and everything, because I tried everything. Let's go to the crazy stuff because nothing's working for this leg. But I did it. I started to get back, sure enough, and then I remember my first race back. It was the largest obstacle course race in England. And I chose that specifically because I thought if I choose a running race, my mindset and my old self will compete. I'll think, I should win this, because as somebody that competes, you foster that mindset. So I thought I need to choose something that's completely out my wheelhouse, so I don't go in there with this expectation of myself, I guess. But
so was that something like a Spartan or a Tough Mudder or something?
Exactly, okay. Yeah. So it was a 10-mile obstacle course race. I think there was like 20 obstacles. You was going through swamps. You had to climb these massive mountains of hay bales. Just, and I thought that will be fun, because as a boxer, I did a lot of, different exercises, including the upper body pull-ups and all that stuff. And I thought this will give me a nice mix. It won't put too much stress just running. And I thought, I haven't run for a year. I've just been on a damn bike. So, let's not put too much pressure on myself. So I did that and I won it, which I didn't expect to do. So I came first, and everyone, was like, who's this obstacle course racer? And obviously I wasn't. And I didn't plan to be that. But that told me, okay, you've still got something. And then I slowly started to increase. Spent the rest of the year running, run a New Year's race, and built back up. And by the end of that year, I was feeling great. Like, I really was feeling fantastic. And I thought, now's the time. And I took it so steady, because it was always 2 steps forward, 1 step back. You'd run for a little bit, and then your leg would blow up. And every time it blew up, it would be like, now you can't run for a month. So you had to be so careful. And psychologically, that was very difficult, very difficult, because there was so much time wasted during that year and a half. And anyways, I finally gets there 2 years in, backwards and forwards, runs my first ultra. Everything's going fantastic. I chose what I thought would be a fairly simple race for me. It wasn't that competitive of a field. It was a really strange race as well, because it was on a looped course, and there was a half marathon, a full marathon, and an ultra marathon all running together, but you had no idea who was who. You all set off at the same time. Normally they'd stagger it, someone would go out first, but they didn't. So I was running this race, and I'm like, I have no idea where I am or who these people are, what race they're in. So I finished the half marathon, and I think I finished the half marathon 6th, but I still had another, whole lot to go. And anyways, about halfway through that race, feeling great, I was in the lead in the ultra, and then my leg just went pop. And it went back, not just a step, it literally just went fully all the way to the worst it could have ever been. And honestly, Tom, at that point, I just knew, I said to myself, that's it, it's over. You've put so much time and effort in over this past year to get yourself to this place, sacrificed so much. I wasn't seeing family, friends. Like, as an athlete, when you are focused, like I said, I learned from my mistakes. I wanted to go all in. But something told me at that time that this was probably, I couldn't afford to spend another 4 years at this or another 2 years. This was really an all in. It's either going to work or it's not. And I think I told you before, I knew that was going to be my last race. And so when it went at halfway, I decided I'm going to finish the race. And I dragged my broken ass around that course. And it was, when I said before, the best race of your life, or the one you're most proud of, isn't necessarily going to be the one you win. And this translates to any situation in life. When you're going through a hard situation, you have no idea how you're going to look back on that, or what strength you'll draw from that, unless you go through it and finish it. It's so easy to quit something, right? But it's very difficult to continue, even if you know the payoff's not going to be there. In this instance, I'm not going to win the race. My career is going to be over. Why not just walk home? And you could even argue that it was foolish to keep going, because you're going to damage yourself further. But for me, I didn't see it that way, because when I went to a race, I used to go through kind of a chart, like what would make me quit this race? And when you're going through something hard, you have to ask yourself, what's the cutoff point for me? And my cutoff point was, I can't continue. And in that situation, when the leg blew up, can I continue? I can walk.
Can I take one more step?
I could walk. So I did, and I finished the race. And I didn't walk after that race properly for about a year. It really did cause some issues. But for me, in the scheme of things, when I look back on it, do I regret it? Absolutely not, because I learned something about myself. I'm not pretending that I knew I could finish it and I was some macho guy. It's like, no, I absolutely didn't know that. Like, I didn't know what I was going to get out of that. I just wanted to see, could I finish it? Could I keep going? And so I did. And to me, I'm most proud of that race. I don't have any medals from my running career. I don't have any photos. In fact, the one I was most proud of, when my wife first run with me, she ran her first ever 5K when we met. She'd never run one. I scraped into the back of it, like, congratulations, first 5K, and gave her the medal, because none of that mattered. What did matter was the lessons I learned, what I took away from me, what I brought with me through life. And those things can be applied to any situation, whether it's business, whether it's finance, familial relationships, now as a father. And I also said to you before, like, I want my son to know the man that I was. I might not be here forever. We never know. And you shared with me something very personal when you was on my podcast, that your mum tragically passed away when you were 16. And all you have at that point is what other people tell you. You fortunately had that time with her to speak to her, to know her, and to see who your mum was. But we don't always have that. And so what do we have? Well, we have what other people tell us, or what they did, what we can look back upon. And I take that very seriously too, that everything that I do in life at some point may be looked back upon by somebody else that I care about when I'm not here. And yeah, that's something, that race specifically was something I was proud of. And that was the end of my running career, but it wasn't the end of me. And I continued, and I took a lot from it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, something that you also, again, you shared with me the other day, is that you haven't gone more than 3 days without doing some type of physical exercise for, what was it, the last, how many years?
22 years.
22 years. And, I've been an athlete for the last, I guess I've been racing motorcycles for over 20 years now. I've always seen any edge that I can get, specifically fitness related, as something that I need to put in my back pocket, because much like yourself, I'm not that naturally talented, but I just absolutely love riding motorcycles, and being humbled by lining up against people that you can completely underestimate and have your ass absolutely kicked by. And I think that lesson of discipline is extremely important. That consistency of showing up and always doing the training, always practicing that mindset of, I'm not going to be the best at this, but I am going to finish it. That is so important. So important to me, and clearly to you. And it's wild to me that obviously our paths never crossed before a couple years ago, but yet we both learned that lesson. And I think that's something that, as people that want to be successful in this world, that is, especially as young men and young women, they need to understand that some days you're not going to be your best, and that's okay. Just keep showing up, keep pushing through. And that discipline is one of those, like, let's say, byproduct lessons that we learn along the way that end up making this huge difference at the end of it, right? So fast forward a little bit, you and your wife now decide that you're going to move to Poland, of all places. And just from, let's say, a logistical standpoint, or a language standpoint, as I've really come to learn over the last couple days, Polish is one of the most difficult languages to be able to learn, as well as, for an English speaker, one of the most, I would say, counterintuitive, because it's not a phonetical language. It's just, very upside down to me. We were trying to pronounce, or I was trying to pronounce the name of a city, and I was not even close because of the pronunciation of some of the weird, like tick through a T and stuff like this. So how daunting of a task was it to decide to move to a completely different country?
Well, I think I had the edge on this one because I was coming from a country that is probably the closest to collapse of any Western nation possible.
Fair.
So, you know, I could have gone anywhere and probably had a better time of it than there. But no, of course it's difficult.
But realistically, you could have moved somewhere that spoke English.
Yeah, I could have. Yeah, totally could have. But, you know, my wife is from this country and we do spend our time in quite a few places. But I did fall in love with the country. So that's one. I really enjoyed it. As you've highlighted so many times, as you was making comparisons to other places that you've been, you're a lot more traveled than I am. You know me, I am somebody...
That's why I came to Poland, because Mike hates flying.
Yeah, I hate flying. I hate travel. I do it only when I have to. But, you know, I kind of keep a circle in Europe where I go around, and that's pretty much it. But as you was highlighting, you know, you said at the mean, Poland has a lot of things going for it, a lot of things that it's doing well. And I saw that too. So that was part of it. In terms of the language, you know, I don't want to pretend that I'm great at this language or that I've put in anywhere close to the effort that I should have. And this goes back to personal responsibility. Like, I really wish I was better. And I know I need to try harder. So that is on, you know, we've all got that kind of ongoing list of things that we want to do and we want to improve upon. And
sorry to interrupt, but Mike, you're happy to put yourself in those situations where you're forced to make that connection and make that understanding happen. And I've seen it. I've spent, you know, months upon months in Mexico, for example. I didn't grow up speaking Spanish. I never learned Spanish, but immersing yourself is the best way to learn that language.
Yeah, for sure. And I think respect is a big part of it too, to respect the people, the culture, to understand the history and try and make sense of why people got to where they are, you know, as a society, but also, you know, the histories of certain places really do influence how people feel, how they respond to you. And one thing that I found is wherever you go in the world, this is never a bad idea, is to treat people with respect. You know, when I lived in the UK, for example, we had a lot of people move to the UK who never learnt the language. They had no interest. They didn't have to, because there was enclaves where they could move to where they didn't have to speak it. But just think about what that says to the native population about how they feel about you, your culture, your history. I found that extremely insulting. So I refused to be that person in somebody else's place. Like, absolutely not. And so, of course, I did my best. It doesn't mean that I'm going to be, you know, fluent. It doesn't mean that I'm going to be having deep philosophical conversations. But I can tell you one thing. When you try, people respond to that. And I said this to you today. I went into a service station. I was paying. And she mentioned how much it was. And, you know, when it comes to numbers, there's a lot of them, you know.
And they're very similar.
They're very similar. There's a lot of them. And so it's not as instantaneous as in your native language. So I'm like, what did she just say? And I'm pulling out my numbers and I thought, I could see she was impatient because she's got a job to do. There's nothing wrong with that. So I thought, well, I'm going to make this easier on us both. And I engaged her in a little bit of light conversation. And all of a sudden she brightened up. She was like, she could tell I'm not from the country, but once she knew that I was trying, I understood some of the language. Wow, what a difference. Now you can connect as human beings. And that is something that's really missing in this world. And it's way harder when you don't speak the same language. But if I can do it here, then we can certainly do it in our own countries. So that's my lesson, is when you try, you don't have to be fantastic. You don't have to be fluent when it's a language, or you don't have to be perfect in terms of whatever skill it is you're doing. But trying and giving an honest effort, people appreciate that. I appreciate that. I think you appreciate that. And so, yeah, all of these things are things that we should embrace. And for me, as an individual, if I feel uncomfortable about something, if I feel awkward, if my inner voice is saying, go another way, don't do this, avoid that, you need to look at that more closely. Maybe there's something important there that you're going to get from doing that.
Mm-hmm. So what are some of the really big pluses, as you see it, the really big characteristics of this country that really draw you to it, and maybe you think that should put it on other people's maps?
One I would say is just resiliency. As a country, they have been through many, many hard times. They was wiped off the map, as I said to you, 123 years, just literally disappeared. The only reason the country exists is because people, this diaspora that spread across the world, refused to forget the language. They didn't go to Canada and just learn Canadian and forget Polish. They taught their children. I mean, 123 years, we're talking multiple generations. So the second generation could have forgotten the native language, but the parents refused. So they kept their language, which you need for a culture. They kept their history. They shared the myths, the stories, the history of the kings and the queens and the people who made this country so great. And they was relentless in trying to get it back. Now, had they not done that, there would be no Poland. There's many countries that have disappeared off the map. This happened so many times, but it came back. And then they were dominated, 2/3 of the population got slaughtered by the Nazis. People don't know this, but 2/3 of the population, having just got your country back after World War I, 2/3 of the population slaughtered. Now the Soviets come in and you have totalitarianism, communism for the next, almost 50 years. So, just think about that timeline of events.
It's a great way to destroy a culture, I would think.
Yeah, but it didn't. So for me, there's a lot to learn from that. And again, I don't need to be sat in a room with a CEO or a billionaire or a Olympic medalist to learn. I can be sat with somebody who's got this familial history, these stories to tell of what my family did, what I had to do to survive. And for me, actually, that's far more powerful. That's far more interesting to me. And I think, again, we devalue that in the world today because of the culture that we've got in the West, that it's about materialism, what you have and these big successes. But actually, some of the people that achieve those things are absolutely awful human beings. And I'd rather have a great human being. But, I've heard so many great testimonies and stories. It intrigued me and I wanted to learn more. I bought a lot of history books. People respect that and I respect them for what they've been through. And I think that's a great way to engage a new culture, and it's not something that happened in my country when people came across, and you can see the consequences of that. And there's a reason why countries like this are very protective over what they've got, because they had it literally robbed from them so many times. And I think without that understanding of where this place has been and how it got to where it is, you can easily mistake those attitudes and decisions for something that they are not. And we see this a lot in the Western world today. You are this, you are a racist, you are, or whatever. There's many of them. No, it's not about that. That's looking at yourself. That's egoism and thinking everything's about you. Sometimes it's not about that. Sometimes it's about what they've been through. I know people here that have lived through my wife grew up in hyperinflation. She tells me stories of going to the shop. There was only one thing in the shop. That's it.
She used sitting in line for, 4 months for a used washing machine just to get rid of their currency?
Yeah, my father-in-law, when he lived through the hyperinflation, there was literally nothing. And I've got his paper slips. He saved every single one of them. And as you're going through them, the numbers are going up exponentially every single month. And I sat down and discussed with him, how did you survive that? And he said, we walked around with our entire life savings in our back pocket, just looking for something to buy. And when I say something, I mean any old shit. Anything that could potentially have value, because those pieces of paper have zero value. And next month, it's going to be worth 1/10 of what it is right now. And that speeds up. So at some point, it gets to tomorrow, it's worth 1/10 of what it was yesterday. And at one point, he heard a rumor that there was going to be a used, rusty old washing machine in this tat shop that was going to get imported from God knows where. And so he stood in a queue, and there was lots of people in the queue because people will always try and do what's best for their survival. And in this instance, it was get rid of this failing currency. So he stood in a queue for 2 weeks. And he did shifts with his cousin because they had to work. This wasn't like a holiday or stand in a queue. I don't have to worry about life. It's no, we're living hand to mouth. I'm going to stand here for 12 hours. Then you're going to stand here for 12 hours. You're going to sleep in the queue because we need to keep our place. And they got to the front of the queue And sure enough, the washing machine was there and they bought it. So 2 weeks in a queue, that was their life. But when they got to the front of the queue, the guy said, oh yeah, I might have another. And they said, when? They said, I don't know, but I think I might get another. So they went to the back of the queue and did the whole damn thing again. Now, firstly, just think about how humiliating that is, to live like this, just to survive. But secondly, think of the mental resiliency and what we can learn from that. They weren't athletes, like when we talk about the things that we do, granted, there's lessons to be taken from there maybe for other people, but there's a lot of lessons to be learned from just everyday people, because that was life and death. That's survival. Smuggling helmets from Germany on a train. If you get found out, you get beaten over the head with a truncheon. Wedding rings that came up Uncle Marek's ass because the gold was illegal. Like, these are real life stories, right? Yeah. And, first date, my father-in-law, I hope he doesn't mind me saying this, he's not going to watch it. On his first date, he, I think it was the horse and cat, not the car, the horse and cat. There was some roadkill and he made, there's some meat there, I'm going to come back for it later. My wife remembers eating apple sandwiches every day for like 10 years because the apples were free. They fall from trees and all they had was bread. And I think in the West, and I don't want to sound, like a doomsdayer, but I think we had it really good in the West. Communism still existed in this country when MTV existed in the West. Mm-hmm. And we're seeing right now a big pendulum swing in the world from west to east. And the West is looking, to me, at least in my lifetime, like the trajectory has just been down, and it's steepening down. It's not getting better, it's steepening. And so I think now's a really good time to look to these countries that many of us have ignored because we wasn't there, didn't matter to us, that's fine. But maybe now we can go to those countries, look at them, go study the culture, go spend time there, see how people lived, and you'll find that actually there's a lot to learn, there's a lot to take away. And maybe actually those countries are going to be far better prepared for the future than we are because of the luxury that we've had. And we might not see it as luxury, but that's my attitude is, I'm here to absorb, to learn. I'm not here to push myself or my culture on anything. And it's been great. I would say to anyone, if you want to walk through history, not read about it, you want to walk through it, these are the countries to go to because there's no sanitization of the history. You've been to a castle built by the Teutonic Knights. You've walked around post-Soviet buildings. You've seen German buildings, and you've literally lived through all these different areas of history just on your trip here, and that's pretty powerful stuff, I imagine.
Well, and that's what I was going to say is the more I travel, and I've traveled a lot, the more I do understand that what we do have in the West is very luxurious, right? It is a luxury to have let's say the standard of living that we do enjoy currently, but I obviously also recognize that is on the downhill. Realistically, like our values as a country, our wealth as the average person thinks about it is being eroded at a shocking pace. And I've so many times through my career in podcasting just wish that I could help share this message with more people. Obviously, there's better and worse ways to do that, but everybody's going to come to it in their own time. However, being in a place like this, seeing what some of these people live through is unbelievable to somebody that grew up in realistically such a comfortable place. And I think you did as well. But, this kind of brings us to your career, let's say, transition into podcasting. You shared with me the other day, obviously we've talked a lot about what your arc through podcasting has been. Of course, you didn't really have a whole lot of experience in this as well, either. It's very similar to myself. But as you made your way through this career, you shared with me there was 2 major turning points for your channel. What were those, and why did you have, let's say, 2 mass exoduses from your channel?
Yeah, that's interesting that you brought that up. The 2 mass exoduses from my channel, where the first was when I discussed what I thought of Bitcoin. So, I've always seen my channel as something, a place where I can discuss what I think about something. It's not to get views. It's not to get listeners. Of course, you hope that people receive your opinions. And for me, why
at least it makes them think.
That's totally it. I hope that when I make a video, even if somebody disagrees with it, it gives them just a different frame of reference or perspective on an issue. That's totally all it's about for me. And so when I discussed Bitcoin and I said, I've got a different opinion and here it is, and I don't need to say what that is, you could go and see it. But there was a lot of people who laughed, and again, that's instructive. That's instructive in and of itself, that people struggle with a certain opinion on that. And I would say, again, we need to really focus in on those moments where something challenges us a lot. I said this to you, Tom, like, if people say, oh, Mike likes gold, it's like, yeah, and you know what? I want to hear the worst take on gold. I want to hear the most skeptical take on that asset. I want to hear all the different ways it can go wrong, because as an investor, my job is to risk manage. If I'm supporting other people, it's to help them risk manage. So I want to know, is there a risk that I've missed? Like, am I missing something? So give me the worst take so I can absorb that into my thinking and manage it. And so that's how I look at Bitcoin. It's not about I hate this asset. It's just literally that I was saying, I see a risk here. I see some risks that maybe people aren't discussing. Let's look at them. Let's shine a light on them. So if you like this asset, you can absorb that into your thinking. But the last thing we should do is reject that. It's kind of like if someone gives you constructive feedback and your ego is so big, you can't take it. Okay, that's one way to live. But is it going to get you to where you want to go? Is it going to make you a better person, a better athlete, investor? No, it's not. So that was the first one. And the second one was discussing Javier Milei. And I was a little bit skeptical of the guy. And, I'm pretty good at understanding propaganda because I live in a country that was controlled by propaganda. Like, everything about totalitarianism comes back to propaganda, because they have to make you eat a shit sandwich and they're going to tell you it's caviar. That's the way it works with propaganda. And they have to do it again and again and again. And I've eaten enough shit sandwiches over the past few years in terms of propaganda that I became pretty wise to it. And I said, okay, I'm not going to say that he's not this. I'm just going to hold it to the light. And some of the things that was happening that I was being told was under a certain banner, I looked and said, wait a minute, I've seen this before. I recognize this. And some of I did an episode once where I said, many of the things that are happening in this country, I saw when Greece had the Eurozone crisis. The country almost collapsed. It almost defaulted. There was Yanis Varoufakis who was saying, let's default on the IMF. They didn't default, but under a socialist government, they did the deepest austerity. Suicide rates absolutely skyrocketed in that company. People who used to have families used to have 2-3 houses, had to remortgage and had their property just stripped from them. The pension that people had was cut in half again, cut in half again. This happened continuously. And then the working age went up to something like 80. It was literally awful. And then, of course, the country's infrastructure got sold off. So they couldn't even pull themselves out of it because they didn't own the wealth of their own nation. So when I saw some of these things being implemented in Argentina, I said, well, you're branding this as libertarianism, but, I saw this under socialism in Greece. And actually, it's neither. It's just cookie cutter IMF responses to debt. And maybe it would have gone good in Argentina. I don't know. I'm not saying that, but I was just trying to give a different take, like a different perspective, because I think that's so valuable. One of the things that I love in life is when I meet somebody who looks at a situation I've looked at, and I think I've looked at it from every angle, and they say something, I'm like, I missed that. I missed it completely. And I find that really valuable in a person. And those are the kind of people I try to surround myself with. The last thing you want to do in life is surround yourself with people who just agree with you. Like, how much would that suck? But going back to the channel, 2 of those, that's the 2 situations. So I had 2 exoduses. And the people that stuck around, I guess they stuck around because they like hearing the take that I give. even if that is a bad take, they, for whatever reason, want to hear it. They want to see what Mike's got to say on it. And I'd rather that than a lot of people who just agree with me because they were all in an echo chamber. And where's that going to take us? Like longer term, it's not going to take us very far.
Well, I think phrasing it as a take is maybe the wrong word, because to me a take means something like a little bit more disingenuous, right? You're not having a take. This is your honest opinion after considered research, right? This is not something that is just knee-jerk reaction and you kind of sticking to a script. You deliberately spoke your mind, and I really respect that. We need more people in this day and age that are willing to respectfully speak their mind and back it up with why they think that, and be open to challenge and disagreement as long as it's civil. I recently watched another podcast with Dave Smith and Nick Fuentes. I don't care how anybody feels about it, but it was about either of those two characters. But it was honestly one of like a masterclass in civil disagreement and coming to a common place of understanding maybe that they both decided we're going to sit down, hash this out as men, as respectfully. Nobody raised their voice, nobody got upset. And that's what we really need to do. And to have your ideas challenged is only going to make every one of us stronger. It is uncomfortable at times. Take a deep breath, push through it, try to understand the other person, try to find some common ground. That is going to take us so much further as a society. And we really need leaders to be able to exemplify and show how to do that and show that example for everybody else to learn from, I think.
Yeah, I really like how you put it. I think what we need in the world today more than anything is to listen to each other, because listening is a two-way street. Listening isn't having somebody else shout at you and just give you their opinions. That's a one-way street. Listening is when two people come together and they have different opinions, different views, and they hear the other person out. And the other person might be right on, 5%, they could be right on 50%, we don't know. But by listening to somebody else, you expose yourself to a different view, you give yourself the opportunity to rethink, recalculate what you have already made your mind upon. That's so valuable. And I think most of the problems in the West could be resolved if people were just willing to listen. Mm-hmm. And the people who don't want the West to succeed are the people who will tell you the other is the enemy, that there has to be this antagonism constantly. And I don't believe that personally. And, part of my career was listening a lot. Sometimes the people you don't want to listen to, but you get paid to listen. So that's the way it is. There's families out there that are not great families, people who do bad things, and you have to listen to them. So my listening skills were pretty good, and I try to use them as best as I can on the show. One of the examples that I would give is I've got a friend who is a Bitcoin maximalist. I couldn't.
And you consider him a friend, not just an acquaintance.
Not only a friend, he's been to my farm and he's spent time with me, and he knows what I think, and he has the complete opposite take. But guess what? By listening to me, he's moved his viewpoint just a little bit. And by listening to him, I moved my viewpoint just a little bit. Doesn't mean that we reevaluated everything and changed everything. No, but we just budged our position. We became a little bit less dogmatic, which is really important in this world, to think I know everything. I don't know everything. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I need somebody else to remind me of that. And I value that, and vice versa. And he said to me the other day, he said, Mike, I've got a really strange feeling that one of us is going to be right. And the other one will be dead wrong, and the other one's going to be 100% right. And I said, probably. But I'm hoping that by us engaging like this and having these conversations, that if one of us is dead wrong, it's not so wrong that it's fatal, because we've budged enough that, we've covered our backs. And yeah, that's something that we all need, because the world, like you said, it's looking pretty hairy right now. And I guess that's a big problem. In the West, we have this culture, this legacy of democracy, of free speech, where people used to debate things out, the art of rhetoric going all the way back to the ancient Greeks. I don't see that so much anymore. And even in what we do, the alternative media, the financial media, whatever you want to call it, there is a problem that I see. This is becoming the desired way of conversing, is to argue, to debate, to wreck someone. You see these YouTube videos, it's always about someone destroying someone. I don't want that. I want to hear what you just said. Two people sitting down and debating something, and for me to be a listener and say, wow, I never thought about it this way. I never thought about it that way. I don't need someone to pat me on the back and stroke my ego of what I already think. That's got zero value at all. And, as an investor, even just for your own selfish reasons, you want to succeed. You don't want to lose your wealth. So why would you want someone to give you total cognitive bias and just reinforce what you already think? Like, when has that go back throughout financial history, when has that ever worked? Never. It's always been fatal. Because at some point, you're going to miss that tidal wave that's coming just behind your back because you were so ignorant. You was looking through your binoculars at this one destination and there's a tidal wave behind you. And as a sailor, I never had no tidal waves, but we learned a little bit about looking for the unexpected. We spoke about this earlier. My wife's on the binoculars watching couches coming down the river. You don't want to hit one of them or a tree. So yeah, these are just the lessons that we have to assimilate in life. And like I said, I'm no guru. I'm just like anybody else. I mess up all the time. I hope I improve. I hope I eventually get to a good destination. But I'd rather have people on my side who are gonna give me, critical feedback, information that I might not have. Your show, historically, what you've done with Palisades was a key part of that. A key part of my strategy was having somebody that could get the best out of other people, all these different array of guests. And guess what? I didn't agree with all those guests. Some of those guests I didn't agree with that at all, but I still listened to it because I want to know what you're thinking, why you're thinking it. Give me your best argument as to why you think this. And I can't help but think, even if in the moment I don't fully recognize how it's changed me, it's there in my subconscious and it's probably chipping away at some of my own biases.
Going back to what you were saying about, these, let's say, these channels that try to wreck someone and really tear their ideas down. That's, in my experience, that's typically done without the presence of that other person, right? And so to be able to sit down face to face and do it, and in a civil manner too, and not get pissed off and walk away angry is that's a skill. And it's a skill that we all need to be kind of cultivating and practicing. So Mike, something that I really hope to achieve with Competent Man is this idea that, or to try to learn something from each and every guest. And I think an excellent way to kind of frame this question is to ask you, maybe, because we celebrated your son's 2-month birthday today, and I'm very grateful that you were able to make some time for me, considering how new he is. So what are some of the lessons that you would hope to impart upon him as he grows up here? You've shared with me that you know, of course, having the humility that you do, you know that you're not going to be here maybe tomorrow, right? Every day isn't guaranteed. So an excellent way to kind of frame that is to think about, what are some of the things that my son should know about me, or the lessons that I want him to learn if I wasn't here tomorrow?
Yeah, thanks for asking that, Tom. Yeah, it's a great question. And for me, I guess I'd keep it very simple in that for anybody, and of course for me, I think often about what I would want my son to take from my life if I wasn't here. And it's that no matter what hand you dealt, because life is, so unpredictable. We like to think that we've got this comfortable life and that we can predict the future and everything will always go in the same linear fashion, but it doesn't. Unexpected events befall us all the time, and nobody knows how long they're going to be here. So there's a lot of risk out there that we just don't acknowledge. And there's nothing wrong with risk, but I do think that we should always try and think forwards about what we're going to leave behind. So for me, it would be simply this, like whatever hand you were dealt in life, And I've worked with people who were dealt the worst hands in life. You know, they got a 2 and a 4 and a joke.
And half a ripped up Uno card.
Yeah, so they didn't have the best hands at all. And yet those people made the most of that. And they went way further than people that were given a lot of advantages that they didn't have. And I think what really separated them was their ability to see themselves in a better situation, to be disciplined and to develop that inner strength. And sometimes those things that befell them in the past were actually the fire that drove them forwards. So for me, I would say that my life has had many examples of that. And for somebody like my son, for example, or some young person that I was seeking to mentor, I would say it's to never accept that victimhood card that is very available in the world today. You know, it's very readily available. And to always say, no matter what's happened, what can I do with this? How could I turn this to my advantage? How could I make this a springboard for something better? And I think if you can learn that skill or that art or that philosophy, I think it's all 3 actually. If you can do that, then I think you can make the most of your time here, irrespective of what happens to you and irrespective of what the future brings to you. And so I try to embody that. I try to live that. Not all the time we're going to succeed, but I try to keep it in my mind. And so hopefully I'll pass that on. Or if I'm not here, somebody else says, you know, it might not have been, you know, the smartest, the most intelligent guy out there or the richest guy out there, but here's some examples, you know, of what he did. And hopefully that could be a fuel for him to try and do something similar and to just draw those, you know, we spoke about mining the gold from somebody. You can do that from anybody, whether it's another living human being or somebody from the past, somebody from a novel. It could be a character that was written, for example. It doesn't have to be a real person, but that's available to us all. Take what you can, absorb it, and try and use it in your own life.
Excellent. Mike, I want to really express my gratitude to you to be so welcoming and all the hospitality that you've given me. I really am extremely grateful for it. Why don't you let our audience know where they can find you if they want to read more of your work or see your podcast?
Well, likewise, Tom. Yeah, I appreciate everything that you've given me and the community with your fantastic interviews and what you are continuing to do with Competent Man. And you can find me over on Substack, just substack.com, and it's Parallel Systems. I write a lot, of course, about gold, silver, and also try to bring in some other elements too, talking about some of these qualities that we discussed tonight. And I do have a podcast too, which is the Parallel Mike Podcast.
Perfect. Mike, thank you so much.
Thank you, Tom.